G'day Internet. So we're back with another video on how to improve your secure code review skills. And today we're going to look at exploring a bug class. And we're sticking with the same bug class as the previous video, which is SQL injection. I did briefly touch on the root cause of SQL injection, or what it looks like in code. To learn more about SQL injection and other bug class, you can go to the CWE website. They have a lot of definitions for different vulnerability classes, and you can explore them through links on each issue. Now they also have usually code examples, in this case multiple code examples, and references for CVEs, and again you can click on those, explore this further. So let's start by looking at a pretty basic example. Again, this is a C# example, but it's taking a variable and then using that variable in a database query. So if we were to explore this, we're simulating user input here, in this case admin, and we have a query that's supposed to run select asterisk from users where name equals. And so if we run this, we see that the string we get is select asterisk from user where name equals admin, obviously within single quotes to indicate that we're doing string matching. And if we were to put an apostrophe in here, the corresponding query would be select asterisk from users where name in ADM. And this signifies that we've reached the end of the string comparison and the remaining bits should be more SQL syntax. If you were to run this in a database, it would generate an error because it's not valid syntax. But what has happened is we have subverted the meaning, the syntactical meaning of the query. Typically, to exploit this, you would add in a comment so that the dashes is a syntactical meaning of a comment in the database language that says everything that occurs after the start of the comment will be ignored. So this stray bit of SQL gets ignored. This might be a great example. A better example is usually where there's a compound clause. So you'd look for users that are active. And if we were to run this again now, you'd see that we have all this trailing bit of database query syntax. And so in order to make sure that that doesn't interfere with what we're doing, this part of the query would be ignored. So effectively, you've terminated the query into select asterisk from users where name equals ADM. And so since most authentication systems tend to select users based on username and password, the normal payload that you would see for this is something like this. Some more. So we would return any user that has the username admin, or all the other users that have the condition of 1 equal 1, which is always true. So this would return all the users in the table. Now, using or 1 equals 1 is a dangerous operation. Most SQL injection tutorials will use this. The safer option is to use and 1 equals 1, and then you can do and 2 equals 1 to do a Boolean comparison and see that you either get 1 row or 0 rows returned. The reason why or is dangerous is if this is used in a delete statement or an update statement, because it matches every row you will delete or corrupt data in the database doing it. If you're confident that it's a select only operation, you can use it. And obviously if you're doing a code review, you'll be able to see what the database query is doing prior to attempting to exploit it. Now, usually the approach to preventing SQL injection is to validate input and encode output. So if we did something like this, where we add slashes to our payload, so 1 equals 1, comment out the rest, and we run this now, we'll see that the single quote is escaped, and as such we have avoided the injection, because you can no longer escape out of this. Add slashes is problematic. PHP recommends that you use MySQL Real Escape, or sorry, the more modern variation, MySQL Real Escape. And so it does some character encoding, does escaping. The important bit to notice is that it is character set sensitive. Yeah, escape special characters for strings used in SQL statement. So this is how you would secure a string. And if we were to run that, yeah, we see that we have escaped the apostrophe. Now, what actually makes this safe is the fact that we have apostrophes around our string, and as such, we're preventing escaping out of the string. But perhaps there are cases where that is not true. So I've taken the liberty of finding a vulnerability that illustrates this. So here we have a highlighted line of code where it does it appends and category.id equals keyword category. So we'll go ahead and we'll add that to our SQL. That's funny. And this will just do str. If we run this, sorry. That should do. Okay, so we see here select from users where active equals true and category ID equals ADM. But in this case, we don't have to break out of a quote. So we could do 1, 2, 3 or 1 equals 1. And if we run this, we'll see that the query select asterisk from users where active equal true and category equal 1 to 3 or 1 equals 1. So again, typically the exploitation for this wouldn't be necessarily an or, but you'd make sure that the first section of the query doesn't return any values, and then you would add a union select although in this case you'd probably not have users here, you'd have some data. So if we run this, we see that we have select asterisk from data where active equals true and category ID equals -1, 2, 3. So that shouldn't return any data. And then we union that with the select asterisk from users. Now, assuming that these tables have the same amount of columns, this should return all of the rows from the users table. Even though we have escaped the MySQL real escape string. Now again, the language and framework that you're using might vary. There may be other special cases, but understanding what may or may not be escaped is important. And in the case of unquoted data in a database query such as this, an actual currently unpatched vulnerability in Chamilo LMS, although in the admin section, so it's unlikely to have any real impact. It's quite simply this, presumably because it's an ID, it's not treated as a string because it's meant to be a number. Instead, it should have been cast to an int, or ideally, it should have been not escaped. Yeah, sorry, I should maybe point it out that keyword category here gets set from a user-controlled string that is run through the database escape string function, which tends to boil down to MySQL real escape. Probably actually check that. No, that's not it. Yeah, okay. Again, the reason why you need to test this is so that you can see where your assumptions might fail. Another common place where we see this is this type of setup where it's iterating through an array as a value key pair and escapes the key being the column. So we see, sorry, actually this one doesn't escape it, but let's say that, yeah, clear fields. Even if this had been sanitized here, it appears it only sanitize the values. But a common approach to this is to sanitize both the fields and the columns. So here's an example that I would have seen from, sorry. This is something you would typically see in a for loop, where it's getting a column value from this. So let's say that in this case, column, we want to get username, and the value we want to match is admin. And per this one, we see that is fields, columns of fields is generally something you cannot parameterize because there are evaluated expressions. For example, you're allowed to do math. You can do select 1 plus 2. So we tend to do these quotes around it. And then you would do here, and instead of select asterisk, we're looking to select column from, or yeah, asterisk is fine, actually. Comment that out, where the for loop would generally append an AND statement. Column and column value. Let's see, I'm scared in the wrong. So you see here that we have select from data where active true, should have been, and username equals 7. And again, one of the interesting things we can do with this is we can break out of the encoding. So see here we have data where active is true and username equals 1 union select asterisk from users. Another place where you generally see this is instead of doing asterisks, they would let and they'd let you choose the column or even the table as a user controlled parameter. Now, in this case, you would have to do a slightly different payload. You do something like select username from Joule, union select, and you can see again, we are in between the backtick here and the backtick there. So we are fully injecting, even though we're executing the MySQL real escape on the column. So it's very important to understand the context in which the vulnerability exists, or the corner case conditions of the framework of the language that you're using, where developer assumptions of I'm correctly handling this data, I'm making this data safe, may not be accurate, because there's a discrepancy between what the developer has read or believed and what is actually happening in the framework and the code. And as such, it's very important to make sure that you do the demos. And also, one of the great things about spending time on this and trying to work out how to do it is that as you've seen, the different ways in which you do injection varies. So you'll have to try, is it a single quote, is it a double quote, is there, is it not quoted, and the payloads differ. However, quite a number of years ago now, there was some good research here in Australia by Luke and Louis, and they presented a talk called Harder, Faster, Stronger, where one single payload will perform successful injection across all of these, simply because depending on where you have a single quote or a double quote or no quotes, you'll successfully get execution or injection with a single payload. So there are some absolute benefits to having a play with the different things. So I hope you learned a bit more about SQL injection and the importance of playing with the situations and the conditions and replicating production code in a small snippet. Again, exploitation of these things often throw in additional barriers, such as making sure that the payload is encoded to be HTTP friendly, etc. So I do really recommend that you play with active exploitation as well, even though your focus might not be on exploitation, but rather on code and code review. If you have any other suggestions, questions, comments, leave them below, and I'll maybe cover them in a future video. Thank you.